We continue Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough, by beginning Pelopidas. Cato, Major, hearing some commend one that was rash and inconsiderably daring in battle, said, "There is a difference between a man's prizing valor at a great rate and valuing life at little." A very just remark. Antigonus, we know, at least, had a soldier, a venturous fellow, but of wretched health and constitution, the reason of whose ill look he took the trouble to inquire into, and on understanding from him that it was a disease, commanded his physicians to employ their utmost skill, and if possible recover him, which brave hero, once cured, never afterwards sought danger or showed himself venturous in battle, and when Antigonus wondered and upbraided him with his change, made no secret of the reason, and said, "Sir, you are the cause of my cowardice, by freeing me from those miseries which made me care little for life." With the same feeling, the Sybarite seems to have said of the Spartans, that it was no commendable thing in them to be so ready to die in the wars, since by that they were freed from such hard labor and miserable living. In truth, the Sybarites, a soft and dissolute people, might well imagine they hated life because, in their eager pursuit of virtue and glory, they were not afraid to die. But in fact, the Lacedaemonians found their virtue secured in them happy. The Lacedaemonians found their virtue secured them happiness alike in living or dying, as we see in the epitaph that says, "They died, but not as lavish of their blood, or thinking death itself was simply good. Their wishes neither were to live nor die, but to do both alike commendably. An endeavor to avoid death is not blamable if we do not basely desire to live, nor a willingness to die good and virtuous if it proceeds from a contempt of life, and therefore Homer always takes care to bring his bravest and most daring heroes well armed into battle, and the Greek lawgivers punish those that threw away their shields, but not him that lost his sword or spear," intimating that self-defense is more man's business than offense. This is especially true of a governor or a city or a general, for it, Iphicrates divides it out. The light-armed are the hands, the horse the feet, the infantry the breast, and the general the head. And when he puts himself upon danger, not only ventures his own person, but all those whose safety depends on his, and so, on the contrary. Pelopidas, therefore, thought otherwise a great man was wrong in his answer to the augur who had advised him, the sacrifice being unlucky, to be careful of his life. "Sparta," said he, "will not miss one man. It is true, Pelopidas was simply serving in any engagement, either at sea or land, was but a single person, but as a general he united in his life the lives of all, and could hardly be called one when his death involved the ruin of so many." The saying of old Antigonus were better when he was to fight at Andros, and one told him the enemy's ships are more than ours, replied, "For how many then wilt thou reckon me?" intimating that a brave and experienced commander is to be highly valued, one of the first duties of whose office indeed it is to save him on whose safety depends that of others. And therefore I applaud Timotheus, who, when Chares showed him the wounds he had received, and his shield pierced by a dart, told him, "Yet how ashamed I was at the siege of Samos, when a dart fell near me, for exposing myself more like a boy than like a general in command of a large army, Indeed, where the general's hazarding himself will go far to decide the result. There he must fight and venture this person, and not mind their maxims, who would have a general die, if not of, at least in old age, but when the advantage will be but small if he gets the better, and the loss considerable if he falls. Who then would desire, at the risk of the commander's life, a piece of success which a common soldier might obtain? This I thought fit to premise before the lives of Pelopidas and Marcellus, who were both great men, but who both fell by their own rashness. For being gallant men, and having gained their respective countries great glory and reputation by their conduct in war against terrible enemies, the one, as history relates, overthrowing Hannibal, who was till then invincible, the other, in a set battle, being the Lacedaemonians, then supreme both at sea and land, they ventured at last too far, and were heedlessly prodigal of their lives, when there was the greatest need of men and commanders such as they. And this agreement in their characters and their deaths is the reason why I compare their lives. Now, it's important. Checking something. It's actually quite the virtue if there's something more important than life. Sure, you preserve your life. Pelopidas, the son of Hugh Clough, was descended, as likewise Epaminondas was, from an honorable family in Thebes, and being brought up to opulence, and having a fair estate, left him whilst he was young, and made it his business to relieve the good and deserving amongst the poor, that he might show himself lord and not slave of his estate. For amongst men, as Aristotle observes, some are too narrow-minded to use their wealth, and some are loose and abuse it, and these live perpetual slaves to their pleasures, as others to their gang. Others permitted themselves to be obliged by Pelopidas, and thankfully made use of his liberality and kindness, but amongst all his friends he could never persuade Epaminondas to be a sharer in his wealth. He, however, stepped down into his poverty, and took pleasure in the same poor attire, spare diet, and unwearied endurance of hardships, and unshrinking boldness in war, like Capaneus in Euripides, who had abundant wealth, and in that wealth no pride. He was ashamed anyone should think that he spent more upon his person than the meanest Theban. Epaminondas made his familiar and hereditary poverty more light and easy by his philosophy and single life, but Pelopidas married a woman of good family and had children, yet still thinking little of his private interests and devoting all his time to the public, he ruined his estate, and when his friends admonished and told him how necessary that money which he neglected was, yes, he replied, necessary to Nicodemus, pointing to a blind cripple. Both seemed equally fitted by nature for all sorts of excellence, but bodily exercises chiefly delighted Pelopidas, learning Epaminondas, and the one spent his spare hours in hunting and the palastra, the other in hearing lectures or philosophizing, and amongst 1,000 points for praise in both, the judicious esteem nothing equal to that constant benevolence and friendship which they inviolably preserved in all their expeditions, public actions, and administration of the Commonwealth. For if any one looks to the administration of Aristides and Themistocles, of Cimon and Pericles, of Nicias and Alcibiades, what confusion, what envy, what mutual jealousy appears! And if he then cast his eye on the kindness and reverence that Pelopidas showed Epaminondas, he must needs confess that these are more truly and more justly styled colleagues in government and command than the others, who strove rather to overcome one another than their enemies. The true cause of this was their virtue, whence it came that they did not make their actions aim at wealth and glory, and endeavor to lead to bitter and contentious jealousy. I'm going to leave a tumbler there. But from the beginning, being inflamed with a divine desire of seeing their country glorious by their exertions, they used to that end one another's excellences as their own. Many indeed think this strict and entire affection is to be dated from the battle of Mantinea, where they both fought, being part of the successors that were sent from Thebes to the Lacedaemonians. There, then, friends and allies, for being placed together amongst the infantry and engaging the Arcadians, when the Lacedaemonian wing, in which they resisted the assailants, Pelopidas, having received 7 wounds in the forepart of his body, fell upon a heap of slain friends and enemies. But Epaminondas, though he thought him past recovery, advanced to defend his arms and body, and singly fought a multitude, resolving rather to die than to forsake his helpless Pelopidas. And now he being much distressed, being wounded in the breast by a spear, and in the arm by a sword, Agesipolis, the king of the Spartans, came to his succor from the other wing, and, beyond hope, delivered both. After this, the Lacedaemonians pretended to be friends to Thebes, but in truth looked with jealous suspicion on the designs and power of the city, and chiefly hated the party of Ismenias and Androclidas, in which Pelopidas also was an associate, as tending to liberty and the advancement of the commonalty. Therefore Archias, Leontidas, and Philip, all rich men and of oligarchical principles, and immoderately ambitious, used Pelopidas the Spartan, as he was on his way past the city with a considerable force, to surprise the Cadmea, and banishing the contrary faction, to establish an oligarchy, and by that means subject the city to the supremacy of the Spartans. He, accepting the proposal at the festival of Charis, unexpectedly fell on the Thebans and made himself master of the citadel. I guess we can